From Thom Hartmann's Daily Take Substack. The brutality is the message. Why America's violence against immigrants isn't about immigration. Every raid, every body slammed to the pavement is a public ritual meant to teach us obedience. The goal isn't enforcement, it's submission. Published October 13th, 2025. The following is a song inspired by this article.
They said it was about order, but the order was fear, and the fear was the point. They don't need the guns, they don't need the masks, just the sound of a boot in the dark. They call it law, but it feels like war, and it's breaking the nation's heart. Each window shattered, each cry ignored, each handcuffed prayer on the floor. They're not hunting ghosts or guarding doors. They're teaching us what pain is for. The brutality is the message, the lesson carved in fear. When mercy dies in daylight, tyranny draws near. It's not about the broken, it's about the ones who see. The brutality is the message, and it's aimed at you and me. No need for the violence to prove control. No need for the scream to enforce the soul. But power loves an audience, and cruelty loves the stage. Every raid is a rehearsal, every bruise a line rehearsed. They say it's about justice, but justice never comes first. The brutality is the message. You can hear it in the cries. A government that fears its people teaches fear to survive. And when we stop feeling outrage, when we learn to look away, freedom doesn't die in chaos, it dies in silence every day. The violence we ignore is the violence we become.
For the Trump regime, the brutality is the point. It's the means to the end of a violent, single-party state that they're openly proclaiming, even though our media insists on turning away from it. Back in the 1980s, I lived with my family and worked in Germany for a bit short of 2 years. The international relief agency I worked for and lived at the headquarters of jumped through all the necessary hoops to get me a work permit, but if I'd overstayed my permit visa, nobody would have kicked down my front door or invaded my home with flashbangs and automatic weapons drawn. Nobody would have smashed in the windows of my car, shot at me with pepper balls or rubber-coated bullets, or snatched our 3 children and put them into privatized, quote, Christian, end quote, foster care system from which thousands of kids simply vanish. Instead, a polite fellow from the Ausländerbehörden immigration office would have dropped by, perhaps with a local police official, to tell me how to navigate the system to either acquire the right to stay or work out how I'd be leaving. He'd give me a few weeks or possibly even a few months to get everything together and leave the country. I knew a few German police officers. They're incredibly professional, having to have graduated from a 3-year college program and undergone what's typically a year-long probationary period before they can publicly handle a firearm. This is how civilized countries handle, quote, illegal immigration, end quote. So, why are Homan, Noam, Trump et al. Engaging in and celebrating such wild violence against people here? There are so many videos of ICE thugs unlawfully beating, kidnapping, and terrorizing brown people, their supporters, protesters, and journalists, even maliciously spraying pepper gas at peaceful protesters in inflatable animal costumes that it's getting impossible to keep track of them all. From ICE agents smashing a window and pulling a man from his vehicle in New Bedford, Massachusetts, April 16, 2025, to an ICE agent shooting Eric Diaz-Cruz in the face in Brooklyn, February 2020, to mask agents breaking into car windows during an arrest outside of Beaverton, Oregon preschool, July 21st, 2025, and even pepperballing a Chicago pastor in the head during a protest, September 2025, the videos keep piling up. Add to that a viral clip of cuffed Portland protesters being wheeled away on a flatbed cart, October 2025, neighbors in Nashville forming a human chain to stop an ICE pickup, July 2019, and the on-camera violent throwing to the ground and arrest of a WGN journalist during a Chicago raid last year, and you just get the picture. This is how it always starts, this process of getting citizens used to the government using violence that will one day be turned against them. When a regime wants to turn the police powers to the state with all the brutality and violence they can legally wield against its political opponents, it never starts with a member of the opposition party. But it always ends up there, be it in Germany in the 1930s or today's Russia, Hungary, China, Turkey, Iran, etc., etc. Hitler didn't start by arresting and imprisoning lawmakers from or supporters of the Socialist Democrat Party, SPD, the Zentrum Party, Zentrum, or even the Communist Party, KPD, even though all of the 3 major German parties openly and outspokenly opposed his Nazi party. German pastor Martin Niemeyer's famous poem begins with, quote, "First they came for the socialists, but I did not speak out because I was not a socialist," end quote. But in fact, first Hitler came for queer people. A year before Nazis began attacking union leaders and socialists, a full 5 years before attacking Jewish-owned stores in the Kristallnacht, the Nazis came for the trans people at the Institute for Sexual Research in Berlin. In 1930, the Institute had pioneered the first gender-affirming surgery in modern Europe. Its director, Magnus Hirschfeld, had compiled the largest library of books and scientific papers on the LGBTQ plus spectrum in the world, and was internationally recognized in the field of sexual and gender studies. Being gay, lesbian, or trans was widely tolerated in Germany, at least in the big cities. When Hitler came to power on January 30th, 1933, and the German queer community was his first explicit target, within weeks, the Nazis began a campaign to demonize queer people, with especially vitriolic attacks on trans people across German media. German states put into law bans on gender-affirming care, drag shows, or any sort of, quote, public display of deviance, end quote, enforcing a long moribund German law, paragraph 175, first put into the nation's penal code in 1871 that outlawed homosexuality. Books and magazines telling stories of gay men and lesbians were removed from schools and libraries. Thus, a mere 5 months after Hitler came to power on May 6, 1933, Nazis showed up at the Institute and hauled over 20,000 books and manuscripts about gender and sexuality out in the street to burn, creating a massive bonfire. It was followed by open and widely publicized violence against gay men and trans women. It was the first major Nazi book burning and violence against and, quote, other, end quote, and was celebrated with newsreels played in theaters across the nation. It wouldn't be the last. Soon it spread to libraries and public high schools. Having established the legal precedent for dragging people from their homes and imprisoning them, Hitler then began arresting the members of the non-Nazi political parties and their followers. But first, he knew he had to get Germans used to the idea of authorities of the state kicking in doors and dragging screaming people into the street. When the only victims of this brutality were queer people and, quote, non-Aryans, end quote, ethnic Germans let him and his stormtroopers get away with it because the objects of the violence were, quote, them, end quote. But it never ends with them. Fascist regimes always turn their police powers against their own people, first going after those who ridicule, oppose, or have turned away from support for their leader. ICE doesn't need to repel from helicopters, smash windows, zip-tie shivering naked American civilian children, and terrorize their parents to get non-citizens to leave the country. Instead, like in Germany and most other civilized nations, they could simply give people the equivalent of a speeding ticket with a certain amount of time to get their affairs in order and leave the country before the next step, arrest and forced deportation, takes place. And they could threaten their employers with large fines, like my employer in Germany would have faced had I overstayed my visa. But not here in America. Here the agenda is quite different and involves explicit and highly publicized violence against undocumented people and their property. For a reason. Stephen Miller told us while talking to Sean Hannity on Fox, quote, News, end quote, in August, what that reason is, what their ultimate goal will be. Quote, the Democrat Party does not fight for, care about, or represent American citizens. It is an entity totally devoted exclusively, his emphasis, to the defense of hardened criminals, gangbangers, and illegal alien killers and terrorists. The Democrat Party is not a political party. It's a domestic extremist organization, end quote. Immigrants are just the Trump's regime warm-up act, just like trans people and gypsies were in 1933 Germany. The real goal of this administration, by their own declaration, is to turn America into a one-party rule nation. To get there, though, they must first get used to Trump's masked secret police using violence on the streets and in our homes right in front of us. This is why the DHS is proudly producing videos showing people being brutalized to upbeat music while their agents are concealing their identities to increase the terror and minimize the possibility of accountability, and why complicit Republicans refuse to even use the correct names for their ultimate target, members of the Democratic Party. Back in the 1950s, Joe McCarthy advised Republicans never to use the actual name of the Democratic Party, but instead to slander them with a slur. Quote, never say the Democratic Party. It sounds too nice, too democratic. Instead, always say Democrat Party, with the emphasis on the rat, end quote. That's why they're flooding social media with celebrations of their violence and why the millionaire talent on billionaire Fox News are cheerleading them. It's why Trump is openly talking about arresting Illinois Governor Pritzker and Chicago's Mayor Johnson. It's why his masked thugs tackled a U.S. senator, arrested a congresswoman, and imprisoned the mayor of Newark, all with great fanfare. If you think Democrats, including registered Democratic voters, aren't next, you're not paying attention. They're already trying to make sure your votes aren't counted, and when that fails, they'll proceed to Miller's step 2 and start dealing with us as, quote, domestic extremists, end quote. The brutality, in other words, is the point. It's not an accident, a side effect, or a result of poor training. It's intentional. It's a signal of their broader intentions, following the classic dictator's playbook. And if we ever get used to it, God help America.